Have you ever wanted to be a fly on the wall while other entrepreneurs, business owners, and educators have deep conversation around what they see is happening inside of the industry? This is something I have been thinking about a lot lately. And when I was on a recent call with my dear friend Jodie Brown, who has been on the podcast before, we were talking about marketing, and I said, we need to record this. And so, welcome, my friends, to Marketing Mayhem. It's a new series here on the Authentic Brand Builders podcast where you get to literally be a fly on the wall and hear Jodie and I talk about what it's like to market businesses, to help other people market their business, and the trends and changes that we just keep seeing in the industry. It is literally two friends who nerd out about marketing on a regular basis, inviting you into our conversation. I'm so excited. If you haven't already met Jodie Brown, my friend, she is a marketing expert, a visionary, and the host of the Visionary Rising podcast. I've been a guest on her podcast before, talking about brand storytelling, and I've been fortunate to lead conversations and workshops on brand storytelling with her community. The thing that I love about Jodie and I is that we are really strategic. And we're in this work every single day, not just with our own businesses, but working with our clients as well. Jodie owns a marketing agency. I obviously offer marketing and consulting through my membership and through my one-to-one services. And I think you're really going to love today's episode. We did decide on a theme because otherwise we would have been all over the place. And so our theme for today's Marketing Mayhem episode is all about trends that we are seeing for 2025. I can't wait for you to tune in and hear what you think. Let's get into today's episode.
This is the Authentic Brand Builders Podcast with Michelle Knight.
Hey, Jodie. Welcome to the first episode of Marketing Mayhem.
So excited for this. I think this is going to be such a fun conversation. I hope extremely valuable for the people that are listening.
Yeah, and like I said in the intro, like we get together and we talk mom things, entrepreneur, business owner things, and our conversations always kind of come back to marketing and come back to branding. And I think one time I was like, man, to be a fly on the wall during these conversations. So we're now letting listeners be a fly on the wall as we have these chats.
And when it comes to business, does everything not come back to marketing and branding? Because I feel like it always does.
It should. It absolutely should. And I think when it comes to marketing, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And even like from our conversations, like I get so much from you, from your perspective, being more social media driven. You get so much from me, from my perspective, being like SEO, that people listening, whatever they need, they can take. And whatever they don't, they can just listen to us yap about shit we care about.
We can't be the only ones, Michelle. We can't.
We are. I swear. And I wanted to have some sort of direction because you know me, I need some sort of path to follow. So I thought this would be a really good time to chat some of the things that we're seeing or predicting to see really work in 2025, which I think will also naturally lead to some shit that we're seeing not working anymore. So, I mean, right before we hit record, we were talking about some things and I was sharing openly, like I've shared on the podcast already. Brand storytelling has always been my focus, but I'm diving even more niche down into it. And I gotta say, I feel like if you're not using storytelling in your marketing, you're going to be screwed.
I agree with you because and this is something that we talked about back before the launch of all the AI education and content creation, all this kind of stuff, is that I love AI as a tool, as like an efficiency assistant almost. However, what I think has happened, and this is something that I predicted when this all started coming up, is there is a hunger for genuine, story-driven, authentic, I know it's the buzzword, but authentic, I think it's
our favorite word here.
That is the podcast title. So I think there is that connection-driven hunger when it comes to content in all forms.
Yeah, and I say this a lot. And to piggyback off of what you said about AI, like I use AI, I've been using AI like on peak performance lately because I've been like restructuring some programs and there's a way to use it, but if you're not leading with the authentic pieces and the storytelling piece, like sometimes I'll feed it like, this is something I want to write about. Here are all the freaking details about this story. Tell me how to say this cohesively because it does speed up time. But it's really quite terrifying that like I could, because I've done this to just see, go in and say, create a website, create a month's worth of content, create all these different things and copy and paste. Yeah.
Yes, and I
And
completely agree because this, I think, is what is leading to a massive decrease in customer trust, consumer
Mhm.
trust, right?
Mhm.
Because you can go in and you can create content about things that you don't actually have any knowledge of. And so I think that when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to showing up in a way like you are going to you're going to be showing your actual truth and like your actual experience and what you bring to the table, because it is just too easy now to create things with AI that you don't actually have a handle on.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off the trust piece, because that's obviously the huge thing, the huge shift that we're seeing with the storytelling's always been there. As I said, I've been talking about it for 8 years. Go back in time, watch my very first YouTube video, and it's on storytelling. It blows my mind. Don't watch it because it's dreadful, but don't go back that far. But like it's at a peak because of this whole trust issue. The market, the industry boomed in 2020. I mean, that's when you were really kind of coming on the scene and it boomed. The coaching industry, the consulting industry, social media, Reels started, TikTok was taking off, like it's booming. And I think there was this ability to just piggyback off trends, the ability then to tap into AI. But now our consumers use those tools. And that's where I talk to my friends and they're coming around to ChatGPT. Like we might have been hearing about it forever and using it because we're using it for our marketing and it's helping us save time. But now our friends, our family, consumers are using it and they're like, whoa, this is terrifying. Like, how do I know if someone is who they say they are essentially online?
Yes, and I have a theory here too.
Okay.
So, one of the things, this is kind of what I foresee. It's important now, it has become more important throughout 2024, and I think that the importance of it's going to continue to get way more it's going to take a forefront in 2025, and that is that when we talk about funnels and when we talk about strategy and when we talk about building out your marketing, there was a moment in time where you literally kind of had to just put the pieces together,
Mhm.
right? Like it was like, okay, if you leveraged scarcity and urgency and these things and you had something that people kind of wanted, then you would probably do okay to a percentage, right? So when we talked about building things out, it was like checking a box, like sales page, check, email funnel, check. And now the messaging piece and the stuff that's like the most amount of work and the storytelling and all of those foundational things can no longer be ignored, because you can in 2024 set up a funnel and get zero conversions if
Uh-huh.
you have the strategy behind it, right? And that I think is something that is, because we're out of that kind of, I guess, gold rush of that boom in the online space where we all had a lot more time to be consuming. We all had a lot of, and I mean, don't get me wrong, people are still buying a
Oh,
lot
absolutely.
of
Yes.
courses. I'm still buying them. Lots of my clients are still selling tons of coaching and consulting. My retreat sold out a year in advance. So I want to be very clear that this is not that people aren't buying anymore. It's that checking the box is not cutting it. And AI allows you to check boxes
Yeah.
without understanding the strategy. And so that's why I think it's dangerous. So if you're like, my engagement's down, my funnels aren't converting, and you have been relying on AI for your marketing quote unquote strategy, like it may not be a coincidence.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off that, like it's demanding more from us. It's demanding more from us as marketers. Like it's not enough to post to post. It's not, you can't just post a reel and not have a strategy behind it and expect it to go viral and convert. You know what I mean? Like it's expecting more from us. And I'll be honest, I don't want to do it either sometimes. Like sometimes I'm like, what the frick? Because we have to step it up regularly as business owners. But the storytelling angle that I'm seeing, because people come to me a lot and they're like, okay, well, how do I use the storytelling piece. And what I'm seeing a lot of a shift is that whole personal branding angle. How
Right.
I did this, how I use AI to save me time in my business, how I strategize my YouTube. And it's still that educational aspect, which is so important in the customer buying journey. It's still you showing authority and empathy, but it is that personal spin that invites somebody into your world. And so I'm seeing a lot more of that I content coming out and working really well. I think that's just going to continue. And that's a form of storytelling.
I completely agree with that. And I think too, the thing that is maybe a little bit misleading is that when we say that we're like we are more is required of us, yes, that is true, but I don't think that means it needs to be harder, honestly.
Right. Mhm.
I think that just means that we need to really get clear on the desires and also stay up to date with it because, like you said before, now our consumers are using some of the tools that were exclusively for marketers, quote unquote, a few years ago. And this stuff moves quickly.
Mhm.
I'm almost 5 years into my exclusively being in the online space, and things have changed so much and continue to change. And I do really empathize because like I am in marketing full time. You are in the marketing space full time. Like we are that is what we do. Like I have not just my own account but my agency clients and a lot of consulting and all that kind of stuff. So I'm able to see it move and evolve in real time and so are you. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who are running online businesses that maybe aren't directly like marketing is a part of it but they're not fully 100% in the marketing world because it does require so much updating and all of these things. And so if I could give a piece of advice in terms of where to put your focus in 2025, I 100% agree with you that personal branding, brand storytelling, and just getting really intimately familiar with the current state
Mm,
of what your clients are going through because it's not going to be the same. The market has gotten so much more sophisticated.
mhm.
It's not going to be the same messaging that resonated 3 years ago that's going to necessarily resonate now. And so that's something to look at.
I think a lot of that too is just because it's a lot of regurgitated stuff. And again, we're not saying this to be like, crap, we can't make money online. We're just sharing this like insight because we're seeing this shift. It's
Yeah,
not enough to just be like, so you can get clients. So that is easy. So you can be healthier because you and a bunch of other people are ultimately saying that. And I think for me, when it comes to this, again, I think ideal customer work falls into storytelling. It always has for me. It's what is the story of your ideal customer? What are they really going through? What keeps them up at night? We teach about the psychographics so much here at Brand Mary. You gotta go deeper. And I think that's the piece when I'm saying it's like demanding more from us. It's demanding us to go deeper on that personal level, deeper into our stories, finding those connection pieces, deeper into what our audience really wants, and then pulling that through with our messaging. I would say the one thing that I think would benefit so many business owners at heading into the new year is like a messaging check. Go through because I'll be honest, I got people who come to me that are like, "Hey, how's my website? How's my brand?" Like I do these one-on-one strategy sessions and I'm like, "Okay, but what are your like main messages? What are your main promises?" And they don't have them.
right.
Like, you have to be able to have that center. You know me, I'm so freaking visual. I'm like, here's a
Yeah.
win, right? What are those core brand messages, as we call them here? And this is something I love to do all the time, where I'm checking back in on my messaging. If I read that, would I take action?
Well, this is the thing, right? We need to be and those like I think one of the things that's really helpful is and like from a copywriting background, when you think about what you offer, like we're so close to our offers, right? We're so close to our programs. And so we inherently know why each feature is valuable, like why
Hmm.
our clients need it. However, we assume that they know too. And
Right.
so one of the exercises that I always get my clients to do is go through and when you are looking at like the features, and this can help pull out the messaging for an offer, go through the features, go out what's included and what you teach, and add so that on
Oh,
the
yes, girl.
end of everything, and then do that until you can't anymore because it's
Yes.
going to pull out so much. And it's such a simple thing, right? Like it just helps you think on a deeper level.
Any of my clients who are listening that have been through any of my programs are probably like, "Oh my gosh, Michelle's been telling us to do this for effing ever." Like, that is literally inside of my brand messaging workbook. It's what do you do? Why is that important? What does it allow them to do? Why is
Yeah.
that important? What does it allow them to do? And you just keep asking yourself, like, why? Because it really does help us get away from this really broad messaging into the very specific nitty gritty. I have a question for you because this is something I keep seeing online about having a niche and having an ideal customer and like how you don't need those things anymore. I have thoughts on this.
Mhm,
What are
mhm.
your thoughts?
So it's funny because I think I see like it almost makes me chuckle a little bit because when upon further research, every time you see these comments like this, it's always like it's just essentially they're not saying that you don't need a niche. They're saying that there's like all these other things, but then you need a niche and then you need to do this and da 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 da. So it's almost like that, like if I were to create something that's it's a waste of time to create content unless you do
Unless
all these other
do
things.
my way.
Yes, exactly. So I feel as though it's that's kind of the byline for a lot of
Yeah.
that. I think that having a niche, like for me, it's all about your marketing needs to reflect your client experience.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, like depending on what you do, it's going to vary a little bit. If you're a fitness coach, for example, it might be a little bit different than if you are a business strategist. But the majority of the time, we are uniquely qualified to help a specific subset of people really deeply and really well.
Mhm.
Now, does that mean that you can't work with people outside of that? Like when I was a hairstylist specific educator, I had photographers come and be like, "Hey, do you think you could help me with this?" And sometimes it was yes, sometimes it was no, depending on what it was.
Mhm.
But I think the idea of you don't need a niche or you don't need to have a specific ideal client, like ideal client work to me has evolved. Like it's no longer when I first came to the space, it was very much what do they look like? What magazines do they read? Da, da,
The
da, da, that
demographics, get on the phone with everyone. Yeah.
because you didn't have to be as specific 5 years ago as you have to be now, right? In
Mm.
order to be effective. And so now I think that ideal client has evolved and it's more like getting really intimately familiar with the struggles and the desires and the like everyday experiences and all of those types of things. So I still believe and coach to that those things are both very important, but I don't think they're quite as like cut and dried and simplified as they used to be.
I think it's very much depends on the type of business that you have. And that's kind of the thing too. Like what we are seeing, if you are consuming a lot of information on like reels and TikToks, and of course it depends on your algorithm and all those different things, there's this creator movement that is happening. And we're seeing this with the rebranding of some big companies like Kajabi. ConvertKit is now Kit. They both rebranded and the messaging is all creator focused. So
Yes.
there's a lot of beef around that. And what does that mean? And does that still apply to course creators? Are we talking more influencers and content creators and that kind of thing? And so I think there's this new subset market that's a blend between influencer that might not sell their own products or they're selling other people's things. And I 100% do not think that influencers or need to have a specific niche or ideal customer, right?
No, but
I
maybe
personally,
you do though.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's just not as specific because they're not selling their particular like branded. It's
exactly.
like you might talk about like a cat litter thing one day and then the next day you're selling a tea kettle and then yeah, I guess if you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, they might not know it, but they got it. But
They
like
do, yeah.
for us when it comes to the marketing, like there's a very specific person that has to buy your product or your service, your
Yeah.
course, whatever that is. And the more specific you can be when you're doing that messaging, the easier it's going to be to close that gap between discovering you and making the purchase. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the big thing.
Yeah.
It's like closing the gap.
And it comes down to, again, it goes, and you and I've talked about this so many times, and I'm sure anyone that's listening to your podcast has also heard this, but it may feel counterintuitive. But I think that when you are trying to go too broad, it
Mhm.
makes messaging harder. And I think you're more likely to reach people outside of your niche if you are specific and relevant and hyper focused on your impact and communicating that to your community of people. And I don't think we need to have one ideal client and name her Becky anymore or whatever. Like
I know, I don't really care what your ideal customer's name
yeah,
is.
like that's I mean, if it's helpful, but also understanding the premise behind it and why it's helpful. And the reason that it's helpful that I think gets lost in the sauce sometimes is that it gives us a specific person to message to so that the messaging doesn't become cloudy and vague. And I think that's the danger of trying to drop a niche or drop an ideal client is I don't see any universe where that makes creating content or messaging
Any
or
easier.
offers easier. It makes it
Yeah.
harder.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because I gotta tell you, people come to me, I creating content is really hard, staying consistent is really hard. Like all these things are really hard. And it does 9 times out of 10 come down to these brand foundations that we're literally talking about. What is the promise? What are you ultimately delivering? Are you clear on that? Because I truly believe once you get, and again, we call them core brand messages here, Brand Mary, but once you get those, the content ideas are just flying. And like I made a YouTube video that's all about a content web, like putting one of those in the center. And then you should always be able to come up with content ideas if you've done the branding work. I truly believe that. Yeah, do you,
This is my favorite visual. It's
yeah,
like the sun, right? And
that's what
like
I'm doing.
yes. And this is like this is your brand and your core messaging and all of those beautiful things. And this is your content. You
Yeah,
can't have rays without the sun.
I love it. I love it. Yours is so much prettier than mine. Like you have a circle and a bunch of lines. It looks like a spider. Crawl. But it's so true, and I think there's so much of this messaging around and this hasn't changed. I was gonna say new, but it hasn't. It hasn't. The 10K in 10 days, like, that stuff was flying off when I started, and, like, you can just post on social media and make a bunch of money, but if you dig deep into it, no matter if you're an influencer, or creator, whatever you call yourself, entrepreneur, small business owner, personal brand, I don't care at this point really what you call yourself. If you dig down and deep into it, that's not the case. And there are tons of people who are doing that, quote unquote, and nothing is working. Yeah.
Yes. And if you think about it, like for the influencers, like it's a little bit more subtle, but essentially it's lifestyle.
Mhm.
Right. And so the lifestyle would be like you could have I follow a lot of like food accounts. They're my faves.
Same.
So I follow a lot of vegan, like high protein, like meal prep, because that's just like my jam. Like I'm not vegan, but I like to eat like a lot of plant-based food. And those are like the accounts that I follow, right? And then but there's a whole other side of like food bloggers that I stumbled into the other day that was like putting a hot dog in a cannelloni and covering it with ketchup and shredded cheese and baking it. And I was like, at first I was like, this is so far from what I typically see that is this satire? And then I realized like, no, it's
No, it's
just
not.
so very far away from what I typically consume, right? So even those accounts where people are like, oh, well, food bloggers, yeah, food's a niche, but they just do their thing. No, no, no. They're serving someone very specific. The mom
Mhm.
bloggers it's lifestyle marketing. So they're promoting products that align with their lifestyle for their followers who also aspire to or align with that lifestyle. So at the end of the day, it is a niche and
Yeah.
it is an ideal client. And yes, it might be a little bit more far reaching, but it's still
Yeah.
there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe it's too like one of the things that I see in is like maybe in the beginning and this is true I think for business owners too, like you should have an idea, right? I really think your brand's always evolving, right? That's why I say you can get your brand up and running in 2 weeks because guess what? It's going to become more refined. It's going to keep evolving and changing as you get out there and you start creating content. And so I think what we are seeing is that like people are getting started before it's perfect, quote unquote. And so, and through that process, they are then refining. Because who's to say, like that food blogger didn't just start sharing a bunch of different recipes, but then people started asking questions like, oh, well, what about this? And how do you use tofu for this? Because your girl loves her plant based. Like, and then they started niching down through the process. So, all right. So then we've got brand storytelling in 2025 for sure.
Yes.
We've got brand foundations in general, niche and ideal customer needed for content creation. And I'm going to say the third one is like experimentation.
I literally had that in my mind as you were saying. I was like, yes, experimental mindset. And I think if I can just like tire back to social media for a
Mhm,
second, I think that we need to drop our old like paradigms of what good engagement is, of what a good result is, of what all of those things are.
mhm,
Because let me tell you, my engagement is lower than it has ever been because I have really gotten hyper specific within my audience of who I
mhm,
serve. And I have made more money on Instagram with people DMing me, with people signing up for things, with people like wanting to figure out how they can work with me because my content is specific than when I was reaching a million accounts every month with
mhm,
organic content.
mhm,
And so that's something to really consider. Yes, and it's not easy either. Like I definitely had to be like, I almost took a minute to whenever you change something and engagement goes down. And
yep,
even for people who didn't change something and engagement went down, like there's a moment where you're like, oh shit, am I losing momentum? Have I screwed everything up? Is this the end? You know what I mean?
mhm.
And what I would encourage you to do is adopt an experimental mindset. Think about what's fresh. What can I do? Like, how can I change things up? How can I do within my like messaging and all that? How can I talk about these things differently? And just create a bunch of content and see what works for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a huge thing, and I talked about this on a podcast, it might have been a couple weeks ago when I talked about an experiment that I'm doing or on TikTok, where
Ooh,
I am doing very like homeschool mom, this is
yeah.
my life kind of thing. And it's not for everyone. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I noticed is I was trying to put myself in this box on social media and I was getting like my creativity was zapped. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like, I was like, "This is not fun anymore. I don't like this because not only was engagement down,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't like what I was doing. And so those 2 things can really mess with your mindset, and I had to do this, like, creative, no pressure experiment, and I'm still playing with it, I'm still experimenting, it's funsies, I love it, I'm creating, like, this starting to create a community of moms that, like, aren't coming to me for branding and marketing advice, but it has taught me so much about experimentation and especially on social media.
Yes.
And for someone who is very open about being a recovering perfectionist, like me sitting down and making a YouTube video and like it being edited and SEO and all that, social media for me, it's no, you just always have to be playing with stuff.
Yes, 100%. It
Always.
changes all the
It
time.
changes like every couple days, but I used to think, and I think a lot of my clients have thought like that's too much, that's exhausting, but what if we made it fun?
And also,
And also,
what if you're not reinventing the wheel? Because this is the mental story that I think a lot of people who hate social media say is that they're like, oh, everything is, we're reinventing the wheel, da 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 da. What if you're not, though? What if you're just putting a new spin on stuff you've already done? Because your core messaging, yes, maybe the lived experiences of your clients are changing, maybe the market's sophisticated a little bit. However, a lot of the core of what you're saying is likely going to remain, right? Like
mhm,
the core
should.
beliefs that I have now are not necessarily different. Like they've
Mhm,
evolved as my market's evolved and as my message. So you can look back at your old content if you don't know like where to start and just put a new spin on it. Talk about a story related to a post that did well 2 years ago. Give yourself permission because I find that the easiest way to get yourself back on the horse when it comes to creating content
mhm.
is to go back and get inspired by your own damn self. Listen to your own podcast.
Can I tell you a story? And that everyone listening is gonna love this. All right, so it's around brand storytelling, and it's my own. Like I said, I've been talking about brand storytelling since the dinosaur ages of technology. I'm just kidding. Since 2016, and I was analyzing a bunch of sales pages because I have this core storytelling made simple and I was analyzing it and I went into some of my old content and I went into an old page that I had for this workshop called Tell Better Stories and I was like reading through it and I was like I wonder like I put it into ChatGPT and I was like okay this is one and this is another which sales page actually is more clear and better. And it was my old ass page. And I was so mad because like I feel like I spent so much time on this, like how what different ways can I say it and yada 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 earlier this year. And I was like, go figure that like this one page that I did, I could have just used. You know what I mean? But we constantly convince ourselves that we have to do something new or always be updating or always be changing when maybe we just need to just put a little spin on that existing one. And it was such a reminder for me to just put your shit out there. Like just do it.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it. You don't have to create new stuff all of the time because especially when you do this branding work, like at its core, I've said the same thing about storytelling for 8 years. You know what I mean? It it doesn't need to be fancy.
Yeah, do things actually have to change or are you bored?
Right. Yeah. Yes. Raise his hand. Raise his hand. Like,
I've been there too.
oh my gosh. Yeah. I feel like Ben, my husband, for those of you listening, puts me in check all the time. We've been here.
Yeah.
We've been here. We've been here before. And I'm like, noted. See you later. I'll walk out of the room. It is true because I think, and going back to what we talked about, I think it's that creative zap sometimes. Like I talked about this on the podcast not that long ago, where sometimes when you get really good at your systems and you get really good at the rinse and repeat, it becomes a little mundane, and you're like, "Huh, I need something exciting to happen, and then we go on this crazy. Let me reinvent all of our things, but
Yeah.
we know that that doesn't always work for business. Like we
Mhm.
sometimes just need to do some little tweaks or some little updates. Or like I said, you probably tell a lot of people, you probably don't need a rebrand. You just need a refresh.
Yeah, or you need to log off for a couple days and read a book, like
Or that.
or meal prep. So true.
Yeah, but we can very easily get all up in our heads about all of those like
Yeah.
things that we have to change. Okay, so because I don't, why you and I could talk for hours and hours, but I don't want to. We'll do have so many more of these. This is the beginning of a series, y'all. So, brand storytelling, high priority. Every single piece of content, email, everything has to have some sort of storytelling element into it, right?
Mhm.
Ooze your story into your website so that when they're shopping around and they go to 3 different websites and 3 different tabs, they can tell the dang difference.
Yes.
We talked about brand foundations, non-negotiable if you want consistent
Always.
content. Experimentation, funsies, as I called it on a podcast. And then let's do the fourth one of for me, it's definitely takeaway is you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you get bored.
Yes, and I think, like, for me, number 4 kind of, like, ties into that, but it's also don't solve problems that you don't have. Solve the problems you do have, I promise there's enough, and just because 'cause they're not fun doesn't mean we don't need to look there, like, learn how to assess.
Tattooed on my arm. That's like as a Virgo, I love solving problems and I'll create them to solve them. That's a good one. That's a good one. Sweet. All
This
right, Jody. This was fun. Maybe
until
we
next
should
time.
just sit down and do 4 hours of talking and it'll just break it up into a bunch of segments. Honestly, I think we could.
Oh, I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm here for it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining me. We are going to also tell people where they can connect with you. Like I said, you'll be back. You've been on the podcast before. You're going to be back again. But if someone is interested in connecting with you, where can they find you?
You can hang out with me on Instagram at It's Jodie Brown. I post a lot, my stories. I post there, and then also I have a podcast called The Visionary Rising. Michelle's been a guest a couple times.
Yep.
Yes, and yeah, that's where I go really deep into all the not algorithm obsessed social media advice as well as general marketing, all of the things.
I love it. All right. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
me. This was fun.
Bye bye.
Bye.